Thank you. I'm just going to start by thanking Karen, Brian, Brandon, and Zach for coming here today. This is a timely topic. As a matter of fact, it's been around for the past few months, and yeah, it's been something really important. Although we can kind of go through media cycles, and at one point it is really up there in terms of how people talk about it on media news and whatnot, and then of course it disappears. But we're bringing this back to your attention because I think there is so much about the notion of fake news, truth, reality, and how is it that we report events and so on and so forth that kind of allow for us to understand or better be political citizens in a way, right? So maybe I should start by the question of, what is it? Please come right in. I should start with the question of, what do you think is fake news? What is it? What's the big deal? Anybody?
I think I should deflect that one to the professionals, honestly. Send it this way.
Anything that's not in the Journal Gazette is fake news.
Great!
Fake news has been around forever when you think about it. When I was a kid, I was always fascinated. I'd go to the grocery store with my mother, and the supermarket tabloids, the National Enquirer, Weekly World News, the Globe, the Star, and they just had these wild, wacky stories. But they were mostly celebrity scandals, or they were paranormal, sci-fi type things, Loch Ness monsters and stuff like this. And they must have had a good following because they were at every grocery store everywhere in the United States, and they persisted for a long time. There's still a lot of them are out there. But it seems like what we're talking about today with fake news started really coming into being, I think, in the late 1990s. And a lot of it started with the reports that autism was linked to childhood vaccinations. And then after that, there was the doubting of climate change. It seemed like an awful lot of scientific and medical news and research was suddenly being doubted, and you had a growing number of people that held to their beliefs rather than what the facts seemed to present. And then it really got into politics increasingly, here in the last few elections, certainly when President Obama was elected, and there were, any number of reports that he was Muslim, that he was from Africa, all sorts of falsehoods that a lot of people never put to rest. And then it's just kind of exploded now under the Trump administration.
Can I piggyback on that? You mentioned late 90s. I think the internet hitting its stride around that time is a big cause in the boom of fake news as well. Because if you think about celebrity death hoaxes are one of the most common forms of fake news. A celebrity supposedly died and we put it out there on the internet. The rise of social media websites that let us disseminate that information has in some ways put fake news in more people's laps on some level. So I think the internet and social media in particular has driven maybe the dissemination of fake news, so we see it more often, we're exposed to it more often. I don't think that helps define it, but it does add to what we're talking about maybe a little.
It's easier to share it.
That's it, exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It used to be confined to the supermarket aisle, and a few people, well, I guess more than a few people bought it, but a lot of people looked at it and laughed about it, but now it shows up in your social media feed, and totally. It's being shared by a friend or someone you respect or like, and sometimes that lends credibility to it, and it I came across the fact that Snopes.com, which is a site that we've used for years, you hear these kind of strange stories, and could that really be true? And we started checking out Snopes.com a long time ago, and I found that it was actually came into existence in the mid-90s. So that's really kind of when I think when some sort of a tool was needed to start doing some fact checking on this. And there are a number of groups now that do that, but is the first that I'm aware of, and still one that I go to check out some outrageous stories that look outrageous. So,
Zach, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree with everything you guys have said. I feel like it's very interesting how the kind of fake news has the increase in fake news has kind of followed along in conjunction with, the increase of technology and social media. So now it's so easy to get everyone's opinion out there. So now there's no traditional kind of system holding back these fringe views. And so they're getting out there and being disseminated freely. So it's kind of the double-edged sword of the internet and freedom of information.
It's almost about who we trust on a certain level too. My little sister liked a story on Facebook that Paul McCartney's not the real Paul McCartney. So there's another Paul McCartney and the real one died and now a fake guy's taken his place for the last 50 odd years or so. But she liked it and it suggested she thought it was true. And I think when we see our friends and family liking and sharing that stuff, we're more likely to go along with it maybe on some level. So it's kind of about who you trust and having to reevaluate that maybe a little bit too.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because the whole Paul is dead from the 60s is like the first fake news.
That's a good point.
And I'm interested too in maybe even a bigger question, maybe more psychological, is what is fake news? Because not only, we're kind of talking all about how it gets disseminated and why, but what is it? I mean, is it just pure kind of emotion?
Is it untruth?
Is it just...
I think there's a very good question in that, as in, so we say that this phenomenon started in the 1990s. Now, Karen and Brian, you're at the Journal-Gazette, right? So you're an editor. Karen, Brian, you're a political writer. By the way, my colleague Brandon is a visiting professor at the Department of Communication at IPFW, and Zach is an editor at The Communicator. So just wanted to make sure that we bring these experiences and kind of talk about how you mentioned something about belief. You mentioned something about how belief or kind of the trustworthiness of our friends allows us to take in information, things that we want to kind of believe that adheres to things that we already uphold in our norms or set of values or whatnot. But this is not new. Why is the phenomenon of fake news labeled fake news now? Why has this not been around, as in why has this not been an issue when the National Enquirer would put something about Jennifer Aniston is pregnant with an alien or, things like that? No, it's outrageous, but actually I just remember reading that back in the day. Right, so please, yes, Karen.
I don't think we saw the repercussions from it that we have been seeing more recently, most tellingly with the election of Donald Trump, and revelation that a lot of the information shared in the lead up to the election was this fake news. There was a story in the Washington Post since the election of a young man who was sitting in his apartment outside D.C. and he made up a story about ballots being found in the back of a truck in Ohio, and then he just went and found a picture of voting machines in a truck and attached it, and it was widely shared. I mean, thousands and thousands of times by people believing that somehow Hillary Clinton was trying to steal votes, and that was just the implication. And I think people who kind of laughed, and I would even count myself in that group, it was fake news. It was National Enquirer level information. We didn't think it was serious until we saw, gosh, here's what happens. There were people who actually believed that these things were going on, and base their election decisions on that information.
Is this symptomatic, you think, of our society and our increasingly individualistic frame of mind and frame set that we kind of want things to go our way? It's that instant gratification part. It's the righteousness that we uphold. And I know I'm generalizing here and I'm suggesting, although I don't quite believe it, that media have effects on that. But for the National Enquirer to be so popular and to be still in business, for these news sites online and those radio hosts that come up with outrageous stories and whatnot, right? For that to take momentum, it suggests that there is a receiving party en masse. What do you guys think?
I want to approach that from a different direction maybe than you ask it, but I think what you're getting at is the idea that fake news used to mean news that was untrue, news that was false. Paul McCartney wasn't really dead, he's still alive, it's Paul McCartney. Now I think it can be anything that doesn't necessarily align with your own political viewpoint. So I think we use fake news, and our president uses fake news to write off news maybe he or we don't agree with on some level. So instead of it being news that's false, it's news that's maybe written with a little bit of political bias that doesn't align with your own, so you write it off entirely. So I think fake news isn't just fake news anymore, it's also maybe news we don't agree with that we put under that umbrella and just kind of cast aside, maybe.
I agree, but I think we really need to fight against that, because I think fake news, because now the way Trump uses it is basically any news with a perceived bias against him, and I think a lot of people use it that way too. But I think what's part of it too is that people lose kind of the human element of journalism. That no journalistic platform or format is not is unbiased. We all have our biases. We're all humans and we make mistakes. And then I think it's really bad to take that kind of human element and whenever CNN happens to make a mistake, and then to label it fake news, because it not only is bad for CNN and for mainstream news sites, but it also lifts up actual fake news, because it kind of puts them on equal footing. That when CNN makes or New York Times makes a mistake, they're the same as InfoWars or Breitbart or something that's actually making up lies purposely. So I totally agree. I think that's something that we really need to fight against, though, and push fake news back to back in its cage.
But can't this be said about news on the other side of the political spectrum?
Yeah.
How do we define truth? Brian, if you'd indulge me. How do we define truth? I'm sorry, I put you on the spot here, but I thought you were.
What's epistemology, Brian?
A lot of times, it's impossible to define the truth, because an awful lot of reporting is just getting different people's versions of different events, and in a way, a newspaper or a television or blogger, any journalist is kind of like a jury in that regard, in that a jury at a trial does not see the actual crime that happened. The jurors have to take witnesses' statements, they have to look at evidence that's been collected and decide what's the most reasonable story in this case. So it's very rare that journalists, on a daily basis, we have crime stories. Well, our reporters aren't at the scene of the crime when it happened, so we don't know. We have to rely on the police to give us what we hope are truthful versions of what happened, and that applies in every situation, in business, in politics, in health and science. So getting at the truth can be kind of evasive.
We almost have to take it to that philosophical level to talk about it too. As journalists, it's almost ridiculous how we say, go out and report objectively, because you're fundamentally trapped inside of this skull with this brain. You're always going to perceive the world through that particular lens, I would say. So as a journalist, you're always having to rely on your own perceptions, the way you see things and view things, and then we tell ourselves it's not objective when we write it down on the page. So I think we lie to ourselves sometimes when we pretend to be objective in general. As people, I think it's impossible, honestly, is what we're getting at maybe.
In many ways, it's the least progressive form of research.
Sure.
Because in the object-subject relationship, because it's pretty much you tell me information, I decide what's important, I put it out.
That's true.
It's very old-fashioned.
Even by being the gatekeeper and deciding what makes it in and what doesn't, you have an opinion, kind of. You're not objective because you get to pick and choose what they get to say.
Karen, you were going to say something.
Yeah, the difference to me these days, and I'm an opinion writer, I'm an editorial page editor, and that's what I do, is traffic and opinion. I think what's changed is we've blurred the line. We used to not used to, we keep in our newsroom a pretty strong wall between news and opinion. I mean, we'll consult with reporters about a story. You know, what else was going on here? What can you tell us as we're shaping an editorial stance on an issue? But we've always tried to keep that wall between news and opinion. You have to mention Fox News, I think, in this discussion and its effect on this whole fake news debate, in that it truly has, I think, contributed so much to blurring this line between news and opinion. Fox News, it's difficult to watch a Fox News report and then the talking head shows that they have, which are so heavy on opinion, and then that's extended now to MSNBC and CNN and so many other stations with talk news, and there's not a lot of reporting in many of those cases. It's just talking heads spieling an opinion about various topics. But I mean, we still try in the newspaper business, and I think most newspapers do a pretty good job of saying, you know, this is opinion, this is news, and labeling it as such. But now it's again back to the internet and social media. It's very easy to put something out there, and somehow people don't stop and say, wait, this is an opinion, this is not a news story. And I think that's really contributed to all of this.
So from the beginning of our conversation, I note that you brought about the idea that fake news may have possibly started around early 90s. That's when the internet has kind of expanded beyond just the main hubs, the universities, ARPA, or whatever you want to call it. And now it's become more accessible to individuals, so people who called themselves citizen journalists and whatnot. So one might think about this and say, but this is good. This is a democratizing force, right? Where we get, beyond the agenda setters, the gatekeepers of news, such as the practice that you were mentioning, that we get to define what opinions make it to that opinion page. And so on, right? Not that I'm suggesting that you're trafficking or managing the traffic in one way or the other. But then we kind of get to the point where we end up, as Zach said, with people from out of every woodwork, kind of creating news, manufacturing news as opposed to reporting news and events. How do we reconcile the difference between, here we have a technology that allows us for equal voices, it's about access, and basically an abundance, or a deluge rather, of opinions, facts, fake stuff, and so on.
You said it. It can still be good. Citizen journalism can still be this democratizing factor where the average person can write the news without needing a BA or having to take my classes. Those things still help, but we're letting the average person tell stories and we're trusting them to do that more. What we need is more oversight. What I think Google and Wiki just announced today, they're working on an open source, fact check, but free of advertisement news outlet where you would submit the news. And they would have editors to fact check everything, just like Wiki, although they do it a little more rigorously to post things that are actually true and know they're true before they post them. But Wiki and Google are working on ways we can oversee this structurally to let people, citizens, tell the news and trust them to get it right and not put factual inaccuracies out there too. So I still think I'm optimistic. Citizen journalism can fix some problems we have with this country in terms of access to information and who gets to tell stories that are told in general. But I think for that to be successful, we need people like Google, Wiki, to oversee how we're going to fact check citizen journalists as well at the same time.
Well, I think it falls to the news consumer, largely. I mean, we all have a responsibility as we're looking at this information to do our own fact checking. And I agree, that sounds very promising. What is going on? And maybe there are some solutions in the technology, just as the problem was in large part created by the technology. But until that happens, and until it's up and running, news consumers have got to do a better job. I mean, who hasn't shared a headline from Twitter or Facebook without actually reading the story? I mean, that happens all the time. I mean, sometimes I've clicked on things, opened them up, and why is this person sharing this information, which is so clearly fake news? And I've taken to, during the election, I was getting so frustrated with some of my Facebook friends that I actually posted and said, if you keep posting fake news, I'm going to unfriend you because I just don't even want to see it. But we need to do that. We need to learn to become responsible news consumers, reading what we post, checking the sources. I mean, who wrote this? It's gotten sophisticated enough now that there are actually fake newspapers out there. I came across one several years ago. I mean, I know the names of most newspapers, aren't a dwindling number of them. So, you know, something out of Florida I came across, I've never heard of this newspaper, and clicked on it, and it wasn't a newspaper. It was made to look like a newspaper, but you really have to sometimes dig in to find if something is authentic, and then even further, who is this person who's writing the story? So I think a lot of the responsibility here falls on us as news consumers.
Brian?
PolitiFact, the fact-checking website, which has a very good reputation. It was one of the first, if not the first, organizations to go through campaign promises with a fine-tooth comb and see where politicians were telling the truth and where they weren't. Last week, they ran a list of what they called fake or imposter news sites. And there were 170 of them in all. Now, some of them they said were parodies, and they labeled them as such. But the scary thing is that some of them had names like ABC News, NBC, USA Today, and Washington Post. And what they'd done was take the website of legitimate news organizations that everybody knows, and so it was like abcnews.com.co. And I called one of these up out of curiosity, and you know, the top story now was very outdated, so that should tell you something that it's not real. The very first story was from October, and it was President Obama declaring that he was going to run for a third term, and why Senator Rand Paul said that was unconstitutional. Well, now, you know, we all know that never happened, but it was presented as a legitimate story with ABC News at the top of the webpage. Please.
Who's funding these things? Is this somebody in their mother's basement, you know, writing, just having fun with the internet, or are some of these really, you know, funded by, you know, somebody with an agenda, with a political agenda?
Budget's a blueprint. If you follow the money, I suspect it might go higher up than you might like to think. I think maybe super PACs can trickle down money to lots of little causes that we never know about. So it's a good question. I don't know the answer. What do you think, Brian?
I'd read a story that this was some months ago that someone just did it on a lark, started putting out these fake stories that got picked up.
Exactly.
And again, it was one of these, you know, guy in his mother's basement.
Yeah.
So I think it probably runs the gamut of, yeah, that there are probably some sites that, because they do look very professional. They're not done just by, you know, someone messing around on the internet. That there has been some money, some polish to it. I mean, that's one thing, is that they are more and more looking more professional, yeah. And I think that's why they fool a lot of people.
But I think in a way, the reasons might vary in so many different directions. You know, for those who want attention, they're political trolls or something like that. But in a way, and by the way, I keep forgetting that we have an audience that I would like to have as active audience. So please, you know, feel free to just raise your hand and ask the question if the spirit so behooves you. So the question here is, first, how doable is this responsibility to put upon reader and consumer? And I think that's a very, very good point, because if we are citizens, we should practice our citizenship. We should be able to, you know, intelligently and thoughtfully do this. But in more pragmatic terms, I mean, I look at, some of our students and, who doesn't have at least 2 jobs or studies to add to that job? I have 2 kids and, thankfully this job allows me or encourages me to, read the news or listen to the news or whatnot, right? But how do we really tackle that? I mean, I think that's, and we trust the news media or the press in general to be the fourth estate of government, right? To kind of really watch out for that. So I'm just wondering, any tools that you can offer?
Maybe Mavis Beacon has like a program we can use. Nobody knows what Mavis Beacon anymore, so that joke did not land. Forgive me.
I'm sorry, that went way over my head.
That's okay. We used to learn how to type. No big deal.
Okay.
I mean,
go ahead, Zach.
I'm sorry.
No.
Not to sound, maybe nihilistic, but is it really something that we can do, or is it kind of just more a kind of a national or global issue with just critical thinking in general? Maybe the educational system needs to be reformed in general, and people just need more critical thinking skills. Because I know we're talking about fake news starting like in the 90s, which is very true. But in a kind of a larger truth is that this is kind of a tale as old as time. There's always been people, ever since there's been people, like trying to trick other people into believing stupid things.
There's a sucker born every minute.
So yeah,
exactly.
So I mean I know it's really hard, and maybe I'm kind of biased as someone who does like you said, watches a lot of news. So like to me, like fake news is like easy to pick out. But that's because I watch a lot of it, and I read a lot of news, and I'm a journalist. To other people that don't, it must be really hard sometimes to, to see a news, story and not know if it's true or not, and to be. So yeah, I don't know. I think maybe possibly there could be some big lawsuit, like we're saying those websites like abc.co. Maybe there's going to be some big lawsuit that's going to set a huge precedent for stuff like that. Maybe Facebook's going to do something that could help their algorithms. I really don't know.
Right, that's a really depressing thought that we've lost out on critical thinking skills, but I think you're right. I write a lot about education, and there are a lot of people saying that this emphasis on standardized testing, we're teaching kids to be good test takers, but we're not teaching them to think critically, and that's really very frightening. Because it does extend to that. I'm just having been in journalism as long as we have been. I know we've seen a change just in the number of. It used to be a regular thing to have school groups coming in. They clearly were doing a study unit on the newspaper, and then they would do the field trip to the newspaper and go through the newsroom. We even used to. At a previous employer, all the field trips were on Fridays, so you knew Friday was field trip day, and there were going to be groups of students coming in. I can't tell you the last time we had a group of students in the newsroom, and I don't know if it's the money and the cost of transportation, or just the amount of time in the classroom that instead they need to be preparing for standardized tests. I don't know what it is, but I do worry that students today aren't learning about credible news sources. And I'm not saying we're perfect. We're certainly not. We make mistakes, but we really try. We really put resources toward reporting and accuracy and fact checking, and it would be nice to be able to share that information with teachers, and I would hope that those lessons are still being shared. But I think you're right. It's a concern.
Well, on a positive side, even though we talked about President Trump is using fake news incorrectly, maybe the fact that he's using it is getting it popular, and people are thinking about it more. So maybe that will get people more engaged with that.
I like that silver lining. I don't know how to answer the question of how do you teach readers to be skeptical, but I think that's what you have to teach them. There's this construct called political skepticism, and there's another one called political cynicism, and they're two sides of the same coin. Political skepticism is good. It means when you read news about politics, you want to make sure it's true before you believe it. Political cynicism can be bad. It's where when you see news about politics, you don't believe it because it seems like it's different than your own viewpoints. You're cynical about all news coverage and all politics because it's all negative in this day and age. So you need to cultivate a healthy skepticism without devolving it into a healthy or unhealthy cynicism, let's say. So that's what we got to build and construct, but how to do it, how to teach that to the average person who might not even read the news anymore, I don't know.
Brian, do you have any additions, and then I'll take them?
Well, the sad part is the bottom line is people are going to continue to tend to read the news that coincides with their belief system. Okay. And it's human nature to want your opinions and your views reinforced by an official news organization. That's why you have, solid, loyal audiences for Fox and on the left for MSNBC. Why, different newspapers have different core audiences. We get criticism all the time that we're called a liberal newspaper and I think that our editorial pages are really pretty much down the middle. But we happen to live in a very conservative part of Indiana, and anything left of center is considered very liberal around here. But I think it may be a hopeless battle there to convince people that they have to go outside their comfort zone and read things that challenge their belief systems or that make them uncomfortable, but think about it a little bit. And then, of course, you've got the whole time issue, as you were talking about earlier. You've only got a little bit of time every day, whether it's to go online, to pick up a newspaper, or watch the evening news. How much time are you going to invest after seeing a story of saying, I wonder how that's being treated on another network or how that's being treated online? So you tend to, with what time you have, pick the news that's there and go with it.
And Fox and CNN know that it's profitable to cater to your own viewpoints politically. And they found that out years ago, and it's why this model is the new model. If you're starting a publication, you want to make money in 2017, make it cater to one side of the political divide or the other. I think that's the best way to stay profitable. And they know it, and it hurts us, it hurts readers, it hurts democracy, I think.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, we're being threatened these days. We have readers, and newspaper readers now sadly skew to the senior citizen set, unfortunately, especially with the print publication. But I'm now, every week I'm getting letters or we get phone calls from people saying, if you don't stop running this anti-Trump, you can't help it with the political cartoons because the cartoonists love Trump. I mean, who wouldn't? I mean, he's a caricature in terms of his appearance, and so there's just some great work being done by political cartoonists right now. But every time we run an anti-Trump or what's perceived to be an anti-Trump cartoon, there's a letter to the editor. If you don't stop, I'm going to cancel my subscription. You're trash. I'm not going to read this anymore. We're sort of being bullied into providing that worldview that they get from Fox News or whatever, and they pick up the newspaper and it challenges that view, and they're angry, and they let us know, and they let my publisher know, and that makes my life very difficult. So
it's ridiculous.
I have a follow-up question, but I'm curious as to Julie's question.
To that, but I think I'm just a cockeyed optimist, and all of the talk about the death of newspapers, and I mean it's very real. I mean you look at economic, you look at profits and circulation figures and things like that, and nobody was making any of that up. But I do wonder if maybe the Trump, the advent of the Trump era may in some way save newspapers, or at least save that news gathering, whatever format it, whether it's paper or digital or something like that, but may save news gathering as a, you know, as the fourth estate that it was, you know, that it was sort of set out to be. And it does seem, I mean, the New York Times apparently is selling subscriptions like crazy. Jeff Bezos has more money than God, but the Washington Post is selling subscriptions like crazy. And so there seems to be a resurgence now. It's different in a smaller, I know, in a smaller market, but I wonder if you guys would tackle that question.
Can I take that one first? I'd love to name drop somebody at the New York Times. John Branch, Pulitzer Prize winner, wrote Snowfall, the best example of multimedia journalism I've ever seen, and it came out 5 years ago. He's got 1 Pulitzer. He Skyped with my digital storytelling class 2 weeks ago, and it's nice that when they asked him about what's the consensus at the New York Times, how are you guys feeling about reporting the news right now, he was like, we feel great. We feel like our job is more important than ever today than maybe in history at any particular point. So I think the other side of this valley we find ourselves in is maybe a peak, maybe where we start to take this stuff seriously and push back and use journalism and, you know, the voice we have to, if not right some wrongs, get some truth out there so people can right the wrongs themselves. So Pulitzer Prize winners at the New York Times are, if not optimistic, feeling re-energized about what they have to work against. And as writers, we like to have something to push back against. It helps, you know? So that's my take, at least.
Yeah, I'm also, I'm also pretty optimistic, and I feel like just talking to like my fellow millennials, you know, a lot of them are kind of distrusting of the news in general, mainstream news. But print usually always comes out better than you know, cable news. Like whatever they say, like, oh yeah, I don't trust the news, and you're like, well, what's the mainstream news? It's always, oh, Fox, CNN, and you ask like, what about New York Times? Like, oh, I guess they're okay. So like, print usually comes out better. We usually come out a little cleaner. So sorry.
You're okay. So I've noticed that like news has always had like a political bend, no matter what. But it used to be in a format where it's based off of some type of factual, and then it bends one way or another. But now I'm kind of seeing that, like, even though I know CNN has a political bend to the left, however, they're still reporting, like when you talk about like the shootings and the riots that were happening, at least they were there reporting on a fact, and then it bends to the left. Whereas I'm starting to see a lot of, like, even Fox would report on the Obama not being born in the United States, which he was. It's not based off any factual information. So how do we like decipher that and kind of navigate that field of, because these are big networks that like everyone watches, and it's becoming less a bend and more of just falsehoods.
Well, I think that just shows the difference between Fox and CNN. And I know, like, you know, I don't want to come off as biased. I think so.
I don't think there is.
I mean, I think, yeah, I know I'm probably going to come off as biased, but I think that a lot of what Fox News does, and I watch a lot of it because my dad watches it 24/7 whenever I'm at his house doing laundry.
Never sleeps, does he? Wow. I mean, then again, how can you if you're watching?
So your father-in-law too awesome? No,
I mean, yeah, he. So I watch a lot of it, and it's pretty entertaining. But what they do is different than I feel like what CNN does, because CNN does have a bit of a liberal bent. But I feel like Fox News actually is more closer to propaganda, where they're actually taking things that, you know, the president says and basically, you know, redressing it, defending it, and the stuff that they actually focus on. I think they're actually choosing their stories based upon what their viewers will like to see.
I think you can make the case that CNN does the exact same thing. I'm liberal as they come, but they are the same thing. They are bought and sold by the powers that be to tell two sides of the same story that keeps them in power. So I'm going to disagree with what I think is maybe an overbroad statement. CNN and Fox are no different to me.
Maybe, and you know, and I don't watch a lot of CNN, to be honest, but I just, and you're probably right for the most part. I just feel like maybe CNN's just not as good at it. They're just not good at being propaganda, and they're more of just, you know, biased.
Doesn't that make them better propagandists if they're not as good at delivering propaganda? It would make it seem like it's more subtle, so you buy it more. And I'm kind of joking, but I'm kind of serious too. Maybe they do a better job of making us not think they're propaganda because it's less in your face. Maybe perceive it that way.
I don't think they're that cunning.
If I may interject for just a second, I think we're missing a component of this, is that CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, whatever else is there, CBS, which is not a cable news channel and what have you, their bottom line is profit. Their bottom line is ratings. I'm wondering, just looking at our representatives from the Journal Gazette here. So Karen and Brian, would you care to kind of talk about how these are structural pressures in kind of shaping news in a way, and how that, although we're talking about fake news in the sense of fabricating stories that have no basis whatsoever, in a way it is kind of dangerous when we have very invisible, subtle agendas that kind of, I mean, as Brandon said, that, oh yeah, the liberal news, quote unquote, would cater to their audiences, and so would the other side of the political spectrum. What's your experience in this, and how can you explain it?
Well, those numbers, Julie sort of alluded to this, but I just came across these figures. Daily and weekly newspaper publishers employed about 455,000 reporters, clerks, etc., designers in 1990. In January of this year, it was less than half that number, 173,900. So, and then on the other side of the coin, the internet publishers have just absolutely boomed. But you can't ignore the economic forces in all of this. And newspapers aren't immune to it. We're fortunate to work for a locally owned newspaper. We're part of this joint operating agreement with Fort Wayne Newspapers, is controlled by a small publishing company based in West Virginia. But the Journal-Gazette, as a news organization, is locally owned, has been since 1888, I believe. Or earlier. 1865, you're right, I'm sorry. Wow. She's fact-checking me here.
We'll edit that out, nobody will.
So, and our publisher to this day is a Fort Wayne native, grew up, went to school. Her father was a publisher, a long family history there. But the newspaper industry has changed dramatically in the years that we've been in it. Gannett, which is the largest newspaper company right now. I was at an event at Ball State a couple of years ago, sort of dominated by Gannett people. They own the newspaper in Muncie and Richmond, the Indianapolis Star, USA Today. And the discussion, as we were talking with journalism professors, was all about clicks, all about what's driving the news. And these editors were talking about how their reporters are taught to own their stories, that when they write a story for the newspaper, they have to, as it is even today in the Journal-Gazette, you write a story, and yes, you're responsible for it if there's an error that needs to be corrected, but once it's done, you've turned it in, you're done with it, essentially, in terms of that particular story. But in the Gannett model, they're told they have to watch the analytics on their story. They have to keep following how many hits it's getting on the website. And if it's not getting enough hits, they have to rewrite the headline, they have to rewrite the lead to try and get more traffic on this story. And it's all about the clicks. And I'm happy that we don't work for a newspaper where that's a priority, but it's out there. And so yes, it's even happening at some newspaper companies. And that's, I know that's industry-wide for Gannett newspapers, that's what they are being told to do. So if you go to a Gannett website, you're going to see pretty much the same format on every one, and you'll see those stories. If you go to the Indianapolis Star, you'll frequently see a story about the Colts, or they actually have a beverage reporter. I find this astonishing, but they actually have a reporter assigned to a beat covering like craft beer and wineries and coffee places, and I mean, that's appalling to me, but they've found that drives traffic to their website when they're reporting about a new craft brewery, and so those forces, they're not just at TV, they're happening in.
I mean, isn't that kind of a reminder of how we cover Cheetos on CNN when the ticker underneath kind of is talking about the air raid on a Syrian village, and you have the refugees and so on and so forth.
I'm a feature writer. I freelance music and beer coverage, interestingly enough. So we find ourselves in my wheelhouse a little bit right here. But I want to say that feature stories are the way into news for the average person. The average person does not care about politics or what happened in that debate last night. They care about that new craft beer or that sports event that's taking place next week. That's how they pick up a newspaper. So if with stories about beverages, I can get you to take a look at a paper. If that keeps you around for the political stuff, that's good with me. So I think those kind of stories do have a role to play. Take my feature writing class, somebody, 315, it's out there. It's pretty good. In the back, go for it.
Yeah, on this you've mentioned propaganda, muckraking. I'm a child of the 60s, and we lived in fear. We'd be under a desk, because we were afraid of atomic bomb and all. We looked at the Soviet Union as this really ugly monster. My parents looked at the World War II as all these other people, but that's all we had was spoon-fed, and all we knew is that. We looked at other religions as evil. We couldn't research it. Personally, I think today's day is wonderful, because now I can hear what your opinion is, and then I can draw to a conclusion and do research. Back then we had Encyclopedia Britannica, and if you didn't update it, you didn't know if Guyana was still there or Zimbabwe is still there. So to me, I think it's a wonderful time. And if you're just going cow-eyed to one thing that he says, that's your own fault. You need to step up and look in it.
I like that.
Opinion. There's my opinion piece.
Yeah, that's a good point. The irony here is that it is so much easier to I look at newspapers, the Atlanta and Houston and Denver and New York and Boston, and you never used to be able to do that. I mean, we got exchange papers literally in the mail a couple days, sometimes after they were published, and you would look at this stack of exchange papers just essentially from Indiana, but unless you went to a bookstore and bought a copy of the New York Times, and now, I have a digital subscription and I can check it multiple times a day. So, I mean, you're right, it's a smorgasbord of information out there, and it's just a matter of taking the time to check and see. I mean, what is the difference between what Fox and I make myself occasionally go to the Fox News website and see what it is they're reporting. Interesting phenomenon. When Mike Pence was in Congress, part of his district before the last redistricting came up into the southern part of our circulation area. So at election time, as we were interviewing candidates, Mike Pence would come and meet with our editorial board. And I remember he came one time, and we generally have questions that we ask the candidates, but then we usually kind of open up, well, what's on your mind? What would you like to talk about? And I can't remember the topic, but he started talking about something that I had no idea what the issue was. I mean, it was not on my radar screen at all. A day later, I realized it was a huge issue on Fox News, and he was taking his news tips, his news clues from Fox News, and that's where he saw this as a big issue, and he wanted to talk about it. It wasn't anything that had really hit the mainstream news at the time, but I mean that's an example, I think, of how the news is shaping policy as well, and in this case it was Fox News. There have been reports since that Roger Ailes used to have these meetings that they would call the news personalities in, and these are our talking points today. This is the topic on this show, and on this show and this show we're going to talk about this. And it, kind of frightening, but again, I mean it shows us why we need to be checking out all of these different sources: CNN, Fox, MSNBC, New York Times, local newspapers certainly, to get a complete view of every issue.
I like the gentleman in the back's optimism. I want to check it a little bit, but I do like your optimism. I'm optimistic too. I think the more information we have access to, and we have more access to it now than ever before, the more we can fact check this stuff. I think the one drawback with what you're saying is people are exposed to more white noise now too. There's so much information online that they have to wade through just to get the story itself. By that point, are they even going to trust it? Are they going to bother fact checking it? I just think they're more easily distracted because they come across more content day in, day out on their phones, on their internets. It's white noise mostly. So I think maybe in some ways it's harder to get to the good stuff, which are now easier to fact check, but I think that white noise maybe weeds some people out along the way a little bit too. I don't know. Maybe it's easier for them to become cynical because there's so much news out there and they don't really care on some level about any of it, so they're just done. You know?
Zach, and then Brian, I would love to hear your opinion as well.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like what I was saying, how, to me, telling the difference between fake news and real news is easy. And I agree with you. I think this is a great time to be alive. Just for some reason, there seems to be, or at least a perception, is that there is, a lot of people that can't make that distinction and who are maybe through go back to education. Maybe it's just an issue with education. People who aren't as educated as maybe me or you maybe, or probably everyone in this room. But maybe they have a harder time with that. And that, so I don't know. I mean, I think it just goes back to education and, and then, like I said, perception of the problem. It could be possibly that we are maybe a little, this is more rhetoric than actual fact, a little bit. It could be that we're maybe worrying a little too much about fake. Maybe it didn't have anything to do with the election in 2016. I just know that it is definitely concerning. It's definitely something we need to keep an eye on, and we need to, like I said, push fake news back, into what it actually means, not, any news source that you don't like. It's actually a thing. It's actually propaganda. It's something, trying to trick you in order to get money.
The original question was about bias, and one thing, how many of you grew up in small towns with small town newspapers, and you'd have page one stories on businesses, a new business opening, and like on page 5 there'd be a half-page ad from that business. That's one thing that a lot of smaller media outlets, and I've worked at them, are up against too, is just local business control, and that smaller papers, radio stations, TV stations, I assume, really have to kowtow to advertisers sometimes. And Karen and I worked in Muncie for many years, and one time the editor came up and said, we are going to do it was the 25th anniversary of the Muncie Mall enclosed shopping mall, and we're going to do a tab on the mall. And a lot of the reporters, we were saying, oh great, we've always wanted to do stories about the fact that the mall is in the landing zone for the nearby airport, and what would happen if an airplane hit the mall. And there had always been rumors that children were being abducted at the mall and smeared with lipstick or paint and whatever, and of course there was no truth to that whatsoever. But so we threw out all these ideas, and the editor said, no, you will write positive. You'll be given a subject and you will write a good positive story, and there will be advertisements, and sure enough you felt like you were prostituting yourself. Mm-hmm. But when the boss tells you that's what you're doing, that's what you do. And that's repeated, at small town newspapers across the country every day. And if they don't, they wouldn't exist.
But I think this goes way beyond, because at least, yes, one can discern that, if you see an ad and a story about the same thing, there are some common interests here, or conflict of interest for that matter. But then again, if you look at big media, the relationship between NBC, Comcast, GE, if you look at, how the Secretary of Environment or whatnot, right? There wasn't much flack on this. You kind of wonder, is Monsanto has anything to do with that or whatnot? So these are kind of very subtle, and unless you really look and dig and be an investigative journalist yourself, we end up just listening to the news that we have today.
One problem has been in health reporting.
There we go.
that many surveys and research projects in health and science are sponsored by for-profit companies that have a financial interest in the type of drugs or medical treatments that are being used. And it's gotten a lot better in recent years of reporters putting that information higher up in a story. But it used to be 15, 20 years ago, if it got in at all, it'd be the last paragraph of the story. And in a lot of newspapers that were, had space constraints, that would just get cut out of the story. So you did not see that. I mean, we saw this for decades with, tobacco companies saying that their products were safe. We've seen any number of companies say that their products were safe and presenting research that they sponsored themselves. And so health reporting is one that I think has really improved a lot in recent years of getting that information out, that there could be bias in these studies and research.
There's not a day that goes by that I don't get an op-ed pitch from these groups. The one that is incredibly persistent is called the Center for Consumer Freedom. There's one called Center for Union Facts. They're big on center.
And freedom, for that matter.
Yeah.
Yes.
But when you check these, and there's a website, SourceWatch, that you can go and you find what these organizations are and what who their donors are. Often they're Koch Industries. The Koch brothers are big funders of groups like this, and they're usually a lot in the energy field. I think there's one of those Center for Energy Facts or something like that. But you really do have to be careful, and these people are persistent. I mean, they'll send an email, and then they'll send a follow-up email if I ignore it, and then they'll even call and were you able to take a look at this? Are you going to be able to use this? And I won't. I mean, I'm not. They're trying to use my precious news space, my precious column space, to put out a particular point of view. But I know there are newspapers that use them all the time. And again, I mean, that's to me, that's my role as a journalist, is to kind of sift through those and look at where those things are coming from. Readers fall for it too, though, in terms of, I handle letters to the editor. For years, we've had this phenomenon. The former Texas columnist Molly Ivins, the late Molly Ivins, came up with this term of astroturf. It's fake grassroots movement, and it's gotten a little bit better. They're more sophisticated about it, but sometimes people will go to a website and, if you read this story and you're upset about it, click here to send a letter to the editor, and it'll give you a drop down where you can choose your hometown newspaper. When these come to me, there are a lot of little clues to show that it's AstroTurf letter, but we have a listserv of editorial writers across the nation, and we'll share information. This looks like AstroTurf. Have you seen this? And then 5 people will say, yeah, I got 3 copies of it with different names on the same letter. But those are the kind of things that we're up against. But again, as journalists, that's our job, to sift through that and find out what's for real and what's being produced by some corporate group somewhere trying to push a particular point of view.
I think it contributes to loop it back around. We have a problem of legitimacy, and I think fake news, just like these AstroTurf organizations we're talking about, all add to the perception of journalists as not super trustworthy anymore, or at least questionable. Like, we're more skeptical journalists have our best interest at heart because we got a problem of legitimacy. So I think fake news at a very fundamental level hurts our ability to tell stories that matter and for people to accept those stories at face value, or even to dig in and proof, to check those stories, because they don't trust us, because they don't think journalism does what it is supposed to do, what it once did. What I'm trying to say is, I guess Edward R. Murrow's been dead a long time, and I think people realize that on some level. So it's a problem of legitimacy we're dealing with.
Well, that's something I'd kind of like to ask you guys is, have you felt at all like when you're maybe interviewing someone or something, have they been like maybe skeptical that you're gonna change what they said or just do something that they don't like, or like maybe misquote them or just misrepresent them in some way. Is that something that maybe has been like increased, maybe, or?
Not really. I've not seen that.
Okay.
Everybody's terrified about how they come across in a story. That's never changed, maybe. I don't know.
The change I see is mostly in people responding to a request, to a phone call. It used to be you would call someone, especially a public official, an elected official, and they would return a call immediately because they didn't want to be, could not be reached for comment or declined to comment. These days we battle to get people to call us back, and even though you might have a phone number, a cell phone number, you might have an email address, or there are certain people I know who have this little trick of they'll wait until the next day and, oh, I'm just getting back to your call. In this 24/7 news environment where you can reach people, I'm sure that they saw my email request or saw my heard my phone call within minutes of when I left it, but they wait, and I don't know. I worry that our influence in the community is not as strong as it used to be.
I guess, it is true that a term that I hate, control the narrative, but that seems to be what a lot of news sources do these days, is they want to be able to present their viewpoint in a way that they know is not going to get edited, or that's going to be presented in a more friendly environment. I think that's one reason why a lot of times our calls go unanswered.
I just want to mention, I'm cognizant of the time because some of us here who are students need to go to a 1:30 class or something. Julie, you have a question. I have a couple of questions, and we haven't even scratched the surface of. No, please go for it.
Something that Karen just mentioned. The Trump administration seems to be trying to completely re-engineer the rules for how the press, government, and the press are to interact. And basically, the government says, "Here's what we will, here's what we will share with you." In fact, the Secretary of State went to Russia a couple of weeks ago and didn't take any members of the press corps with him. Mm-hmm. And I guess my question is how does is there a way to push back? I mean, eventually Mike Pence is going to find all the leakers in the White House, and so what happens then when there's nobody left to tell the New York Times or the Washington Post what's really going on in the White House or anywhere else, the State Department? I mean, I know that's a huge question, but
I don't know. I mean, I think there are good people out there who eventually will step up and say that this is not right, what's going on. I mean, they say even with the new access rules, Trump is not releasing the names of any visitors to the White House now. But they say it's a golden age for access to White House information because of these leaks. And I think those are going to continue. So I guess I'm not so worried about that. I'm more worried about just the number of journalists we have out there, the eyes on, and citizen journalism is great, but citizen journalists, they don't cover school board meetings. They don't, and that's where we need to start. We were having this conversation last week. Brian covered, our congressman had a town hall meeting in Decatur. And a lot of people from Fort Wayne, I don't know a lot, but several people from Fort Wayne drove down to Decatur because our congressman was not having a town hall meeting in the most populous part of the district, and they weren't happy about that. But my point was sort of a frustration that all the attention seems to be focused right now at that level of government. And we really need to be watching what's happening locally and with state government. The districts that we have, those are drawn by state legislators. The gerrymandering that has gone on, that has given us the current Congress, that was done by your local state representative and state senator. And that's who needs to hear if you're unhappy. And unfortunately, the State House, I don't know what the numbers are, but Brian's a former State House reporter. It was every decent-sized newspaper in Indiana had a State House bureau. We still have one, a full-time Indianapolis State House reporter, but there are fewer and fewer newspapers who have that. There are just fewer and fewer eyes on the news that we really, I mean, what affects your pocketbook are those state and local taxes. And that's where we need to be concentrating, and I really worry about that.
So it kind of draws to a question of where do we move from here, but before we kind of wrap it up by kind of like thinking, what is our role as citizens? I'm going to ask, what is the role of governing institutions given the limitations of, you know, the caveat that there is a First Amendment freedom of speech? How do we deal with these fake news sources? And we defined fake news broadly in a way. We started by saying, yes, it's individuals in someone's basement who are kind of fabricating this news for one political notion or the other. But we also kind of tackled the idea of news gathering practices and reporting as, you know, somehow blemished by these pressures or whatever is happening in the world of the newsroom. What is the role of government? What is the role of institutions that are not necessarily government, but they're nonprofit? And what is the role of citizens?
I don't know if government really has much of a role in actually like censoring or anything fake news necessarily. I don't know. That's a big topic. I'm not really sure what I think exactly about that. But I do know that the government should stop, you know, castigating mainstream news, should stop treating news as the enemy of the people, because that's part of the problem. So that's one thing they could definitely stop doing.
Fair enough. And I think the Trump administration, I am in no way trying to make look good. They do lots to make themselves look bad and conflicted on a daily basis, but let's not let past presidents off the hook either. Let's note that the Obama administration rejected more FOIA requests than any presidential campaign, any presidency in history, actually. So the Obama administration was less okay with you getting access to things they were doing. Trump seems the same way. Maybe it's too soon to tell. He's just more in your face about it, I think. So on some level, presidents have done this for a little while now. We're just kind of
FOIA,
Freedom of Information Act request, meaning you can ask what they're meeting about, what the transcripts from those meetings relate to. The Obama administration, more than any other president in history, said, no, we're not going to give you that stuff, more times than any other president.
When's a claim from the onset of the presidency was that transparency, right? They're going to have a live website.
So it's lip service. I think every politician on a very basic level is a liar. And I think for you to recognize that, it's true. It's what I'm paid to learn how to ask questions to get to the truth. They're paid to answer questions evasively, so we never get to the truth. And it's a whole round and round we go through all the time. So if you accept the fact that every politician is a liar on a very basic level, reading the news skeptically gets a whole lot easier, I think, because if it's fake, well, we need to label that. But if it's true and it just makes the politician look bad, that's another ball of wax. I don't know. So I don't know where that was headed, but I hope it helped.
Well, I think, sorry, I think kind of what you were saying, what I was thinking of when you're saying that is also, you know, with, you know, the government not, you know, kind of being too hard on us, we need to just be better.
True.
To not let some charismatic president off the hook just
You're right.
because they're charismatic. So I think, you know, a lot of it, what we do, is just, you know, being the best we can and not making mistakes. And I think I almost feel like that's really all we can do is just be better. But sorry.
It's Karen, Brian.
Well, the problem is that public officials have figured out that they can go around the media. I think now they can communicate directly with the media better than they ever could, and they have become very sophisticated in social media. You know, Trump just today, I think the administration came out with his list of accomplishments for his first 100 days. I mean, that's a typical story that the media has done for years and years with each administration, his first 100 days. They did their own. and it's clearly
Twitter,
his,
right?
yeah, his own spin on what he's accomplished in 100 days. But
Actually, I have it right here.
Nice. Can we blow that up for everybody?
President Donald J. Trump has done more to stop the government from interfering in the lives of Americans in his first 100 days than any other president in history.
How do you quantify that, I wonder?
well, he's tried.
Yeah, there you go.
In office, President Trump has accomplished more in his first 100 days than any other president since Franklin Roosevelt. Now, the evidence for this is he will have signed 30 executive orders during his first 100 days. President Obama was criticized constantly for signing executive orders. Most presidents are. An executive order is a president's way to get around congressional action. But Trump seems to be bragging about it. He signed 30. Obama had only signed 19 during his first 100 days. And finally, despite historic Democrat obstructionism, President Trump has worked with Congress to pass more legislation in his first 100 days than any president since Truman. Now, most objective observers say that Trump's first 100 days, he has failed to produce any major legislation. You know, a lot of the legislation that he passed were related to executive orders, and they were a lot of rollbacks of what Obama had done, oftentimes by executive order in the waning days of his administration. But so I guess Trump is being transparent here, if nothing else.
But
it's
here's
just a matter
it
of whether
begs the question.
you believe it, and it can be fact-checked.
It begs the question about news practices, about the powers that be and how they control what appears in the news, right? Because, I mean, didn't Bush do that? Didn't Obama, as Brandon just mentioned, do that? And here we are again, right? If somebody says anything badly about Trump, you know, they're no longer allowed into the news, into the White House newsroom, and you kind of the press room. I'm sorry, right? So again, how do we decipher and kind of like take away all the fluff around a news story? What tools do you guys suggest for us as citizens, as individual people, to kind of, when we read something like this, a press release from the White House, how is it that we should unpack this and make this more legible to us?
You have to define what PR is for the average person, and I think the Trump things we're reading here, Brian's reading, sound like fake news. They're not quite that because they're PR. We recognize that public relations fibs on behalf of corporations, public entities, to make them look better, and that's what's happening here. I wouldn't call that fake news because he's not a journalist. I would call that public relations, unethical public relations, but it's important people know the difference. I don't know how to teach them that, though, I don't know. That's the question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Brian, I cut you off, but I just wanted to kind of come back to, you know, the idea of like the fakeness of news and how this could be applied to it.
You know, the old saying, you can't believe everything you read. These days, it seems like you can't believe anything you read.
That's true.
I think everyone just has to be a little bit skeptical, maybe a lot skeptical. And again, like I said earlier, and others have said that, you know, check more news sources, try to take the time, try to challenge your own belief systems, your own political outlooks, and you know, try to pursue more sources of information.
Any other additions before we wrap up and take questions? Well, then go for it, and I'll.
The gentleman mentioned when he was reading his spiel of Trump all the way back to FDR. Now, the question that was proposed, what do the media have to do to be able to be in his so-called inner circle? Even back as far as FDR, they were having to pet the dog, per se, because FDR, as we all know, had braces and couldn't do a lot of things, and the press was more or less had to portray him as a strong individual, or they weren't allowed in that inner circle. So maybe that's what still has to be done, even though it's quite a, 70-something years since then. Have times really changed?
There's a dissertation about FDR in there somewhere. Like, there's a really interesting study about how the media covered FDR and if they did so sympathetically and if they shouldn't have. I'd read that. You should write it. I'd totally read it. I don't have an answer, but it's good. It is.
Any comment or question to? Well, I have a big thank you to Brian Francisco, who's a political writer at the Journal Gazette, Karen Francisco, who's the editor of the editorial page at the Journal Gazette, Dr. Brandon Bouchelon, who's a visiting professor at the Department of Communication at IPFW, and Zach Ellick, the online editor of IPFW Communicator. A big special thanks to the Office of Diversity and Multicultural Affairs and Julie Creek for putting this together. Really, I mean, I wrote questions here, but I didn't even look once at the screen because I was so intrigued by your answers and kind of following up my own questions. So I came out of this learning a lot, and I thank you very much. So please, a round of applause for